My entitled mother has demanded that I give her the house because my younger sister is pregnant and needs it more than I do. I'm 31 and have a younger sister, 28, who is honestly the golden child in my mother's eyes, but not in my father's. As far back as I can remember, my parents divorced when I was a teenager because my mother cheated on my father with an old high school ex-boyfriend, and had always been controlling, manipulative, and narcissistic. Unfortunately, my sister was like her little mini-me, and our mother seemed to believe that she had absolute authority over me and could order me around like a dog if she so much as raised her finger. This made me feel humiliated, and my sister was always on her side, so it was no surprise that after our parents divorced, I lived with my father full-time, while my sister stayed with my mother. They are very similar and hardly ever speak to my father anymore, except when it comes to money. I am more like my father, however, who was very business-oriented and started teaching me his job when I was 16. I was very good at it, and after 12 years of working for my father, I became a partner in his company. Life was good, but then tragedy struck about 8 months ago. My father, who had smoked too much throughout his life and had a weakened immune system, died at the age of 60 after contracting the C-19 virus. After a socially distanced funeral for my father, I saw my mother and sister for the first time in years. My father was cremated at his request and buried in the local cemetery, so there was no body or coffin. My sister seemed sad, but my mother looked completely different. To be honest, I wasn't surprised. The last time she saw my father, she yelled at him, saying he owed her more money, and then threatened to sue him, and he just laughed at her. He paid alimony and child support as long as the law required, and that was it. He even gave $30,000 as a college fund for my sister, but 10 years after the divorce, thanks to a judge's ruling, he no longer had to legally send money to my mother. She is not broke at all. She is still doing the same job she has done for nearly 30 years, completely owns the old house we used to share, and even regularly rents out 2 of the rooms on Airbnb. She is not lacking for money at all. After the funeral, my father's belongings were made public, and it became clear that he had long since figured out that if his heavy smoking didn't eventually kill him, something else would. He even joked in a pre-recorded video that I had left him almost all of his assets, leaving most of his money to his business and home, and he left my sister a car, a 2015 Nissan Altima, and about $10,000 in cash. My mother only got $1,000 and some other items she claimed were hers after the divorce, and I got the rest. My girlfriend now lives with me in one of the houses my father left me. My sister went from finishing 2 years of community college to living off her boyfriend and doing odd jobs online for a few years, during which she got pregnant but suffered a traumatic miscarriage. I didn't find out until after the funeral because we hardly ever spoke and no one told me. During the lockdown, her boyfriend's job started to dwindle and eventually he was only able to work part-time, which seriously affected their financial situation, so much so that he finally told her that she also needed to get a better job. As he was trying to find a second job, she got pregnant. She claimed that she and her boyfriend were careful, but said it was her miracle baby. One night, I suddenly heard someone knocking at the door. When I opened the door, my mother and sister entered uninvited and walked unceremoniously into my living room. My girlfriend and I looked at each other, confused. I asked them why they had come. My sister giggled, looked around, opened doors as if she were touring my home. My mother sat directly on my sofa and snapped her fingers, asking for a bottle of ice water. My girlfriend got her the water, and I asked them what they were doing here. My sister seemed a little dazed and ignored me, continuing to look around my house. It wasn't long before I heard her shouting from downstairs, "Mom, this is perfect." Yes, she still calls her mother Mum. My mother finally spoke up and said, "I think it's time to ditch your brotherly duties." I thought to myself. My mother continued, "Now that your father is dead, the house should go to me, as I was his only spouse. But you can still work something out. You earn a lot of money, so you can buy a new house. Your sister needs it more, because she's the one who's about to give birth, but if you insist on staying, you can just take one room and pay all the bills until you decide to move out. My girlfriend and I have been reading a lot on Reddit and know how things will play out, so I guess you could say we're prepared for it. I took a deep breath and said aloud, "That's impossible. You can't order me around, especially not in my own home. Yes, I make a lot of money, but just like Dad, I'll save it and use it when I really need it." "You don't care?" My mother started snapping her fingers at me like she used to and said loudly, "Stop. I'm your mother, and you have to listen to me because I brought you into this world and I'm the one in charge here. To you, I'm God. That means when I tell you to jump, you have to ask how high. The house belongs to me, of course, and your sister will be living here, which is effectively an eviction, but in view of my magnanimity, I'll give you 2 weeks to pack your bags and hand over the deeds." I thought to myself that this couldn't be true, but then I picked up my phone and started dialing. My mother quickly stood up and shouted at me what I was doing, and I retorted that I was just doing what I should have done in the first place. "Call the police and get you out of my house." She started swinging at me and managed to knock my phone out of my hands. Then she tried to stomp on it, but I was quick enough to grab it before she could. "That's it. If you don't leave, I'll throw you out myself." My mother continued to slap me, and I hit her back, to tooth for tooth, 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 tooth. My sister rushed between us, arms outstretched, and said I should do the right thing for once and be a good brother. I said angrily, "Oh yeah?" I checked and found out that it was me who had to work for a living since I was a teenager, that I had to do all the housework in the family, while you just sat around all day playing video games or chatting with friends. You used to steal my hard-earned money to go shopping, and after you spent all your pocket money, you were a complete beggar and thief, so I don't owe you anymore, and you two get out before I decide. At this last figure, my sister started crying like a baby and said that Mum told him to stop. My mother started hugging her and kissing her cheek while giving me a fierce glare. Then, as if she felt clever, she said, "You know, if you call the police, I can tell them you hit me, and who knows, I might even say to everyone that you tried to do worse things to a poor, pregnant girl." I didn't think that was going to work in your favor. I raised my hand to interrupt her and said, "In case you haven't noticed, my girlfriend has been recording the whole thing on her phone, which means we have evidence that you attacked me first and a public statement that you will lie to the police. I don't think it's going to do your job or the reputation of your little Airbnb any good, and if looks could kill, my mother would have blown me away like a tactical nuke. But she deflated quickly and started taking my weeping sister's arm, who somehow acted like a complete child and broke free from her mother's grip to sit on the porch steps and throw a tantrum. I just gave my mother a look and said, "You see what you've done now?" She glared at me again, and then I saw my mother's performance of trying to drag my sister off the porch steps, but she held on to the porch railing and kept saying, "You promised me," over and over again. I laughed out loud and told them both through the door to never come back. My mother gave me the finger and then continued trying to drag my sister off the porch. After a few minutes, she finally got her up and off and said I was a cruel, heartless son of a bitch who deserved to go to hell. I laughed again and said, There's a special place in hell for liars and narcissists who try to manipulate other people to get what they want. My mother clenched her fists and was about to say something else, but I held up my smartphone again to start recording and said, "Time waits for no man, Mom. Get out of my life." My mother then helped my sister into the car, finally gave me a disgusted look and drove off. I thought that was the end of it, but letting things go was never going to be my mother's thing. A few days later, I started getting messages online from people I knew and relatives. Some of them were furious with me, but others just wanted to know what had happened. I tried to check my Facebook, but couldn't see what they were saying because both my sister and mother had blocked me on social media, but my girlfriend could still see everything because they had set their profiles to public. We took screenshots of everything and printed some out. Their profiles all had posts saying that I was a greedy, heartless scumbag who had robbed my sister of her inheritance by bribing the lawyer who was handling Dad's will, which was complete nonsense, and they both knew it. I called my lawyer, who was also my father's lawyer and a family friend I trusted, and gave him all the screenshots from the videos that my girlfriend had recorded the day my mother asked me to move out of the house. The day my mother asked me to move out, he only wanted to write a formal C and D, but I wanted to go further. I asked him to write the letter by courier, which had to be signed, so that I knew they had received it. The day the letter was sent, my mother called me in a fit of rage. I told her that if she and my sister didn't delete all the untruths they had posted about me on social media and tell the truth, I would send all the information I had to the whole family, her boss, and upload the recorded videos online, and then sue her. She called me unreasonable and said she was doing it for my sister, and then gave a long speech, reiterating her belief that my sister needed my house more than I did. I bluntly told her that I didn't care what she thought, and that if she didn't correct everything and tell the truth, I guaranteed that her career would be over. Reluctantly, she said, "Fine, you win. Do it your way. You can have the house." That night, all the lying posts disappeared from their profiles. My account was unlocked and my mother gave me and everyone a half apology, claiming that everything she had said was based on her preconceptions because she thought my sister needed my house more than I did because she was broke and pregnant, but that the house rightfully belonged to me according to my father's will, which she knew about even before my father died, so she had no right to try to claim it. As for my sister, she also apologized, but more or less just repeated everything my mother had said, while claiming that she had only echoed her mother's thoughts. Then she blamed my mother and the pregnancy hormones for everything she had done. Over time, my mother and sister have received a lot of replies on their accounts, with many people angrily accusing them of trying to take over my house. I have received many apologies and sorry messages from people who previously believed her, but it has only made me see who is on her side, as they quickly believed her nonsense. These people are basically all her relatives on her side. My father's side of the family didn't believe her and said so publicly. As a result, my sister and her boyfriend moved in with her mother to save money, but she put them in the basement to keep the Airbnb going. My sister started crying on social media about how she couldn't live upstairs, and I'm sure they've been fighting a lot because after that, my sister complained online and my mother almost stopped posting anything on her social media because she tried that trick before.